All right, we're going to start this section off by talking about interval notation, inequality notation, and then graphing inequalities on the number line. So I've got three different inequalities right here. You can see that we have x is greater than 5. We have x is less than or equal to -3. And we have -4 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 12. The first thing we're going to talk about is how to graph each one of these. And after that, we'll talk about the interval notation. So we want to make a tick mark on our number line and put the number 5 there. And we're going to put a circle there. And it's going to be an open circle because an open circle denotes the greater than. It's not greater than or equal to. And so we put an open circle there because it gets really close to the 5, but it never actually touches it. And now, as long as your variable is on the left-hand side, you can look at the direction of the inequality to figure out which way you're going to shade. So we have x is greater than 5, and so it's going to be everything greater than 5, so everything to the right is going to get shaded. And that's going to be the graph for that inequality. Now let's look at x is less than or equal to -3. We're going to make our tick mark at -3. And we are going to put a closed circle there this time because you've got less than or equal to, right? So it can actually equal the -3. So we're going to make that a closed circle. Now this one is less than, so we're going to shade to the left this time. Everything less than -3. All right. Finally, we're going to do this last one, and this is what we call a compound inequality. You see that it has two inequality symbols instead of just one. And so we're going to put a tick mark at -4, and we're going to put a tick mark at 12, and we're going to make our two endpoints. So we want to look at the inequality that's in between the variable and the number that we're looking at. So there's a less than symbol in between -4 and x, so we're going to put an open circle there. We have x is less than or equal to 12, so we're going to put a closed circle there at 12. It's less than or equal to. And now, since the x is in between these two endpoints, we're just going to shade between there. And so that's how we graph these inequalities. Now we want to represent these in what we call interval notation. So with interval notation, you're going to have two endpoints and for an interval, and those endpoints are going to be surrounded by either a bracket or a parentheses. If we use an open circle, or if it's just greater than, we're going to use parentheses. But if it's less than or equal to or a closed circle, we're going to use a bracket. All right, so let's talk about this first one. We have x is greater than 5. Let's look at our graph. So we know one of our endpoints is 5 because that's given to us. But we need to see what the other endpoint is. And so we look at our graph and we see that it's shaded all the way to the right. It's going to keep on going. So it's going to keep on going all the way to positive infinity. Now, we can never actually touch infinity, so it's always going to have a parentheses around it. And the same is also true for negative infinity. On the other side with this 5, though, since it's a greater than, since it's an open circle, we're also going to have parentheses on that side. So this is the interval notation for our first example. For our next one, we have x is less than or equal to -3. Well, if we look at our graph on this one, we see that it's shaded to the left, so the smallest value that we can get that's going to go on the left is going to be negative infinity. It's going to be negative infinity comma -3. And we're going to have a parentheses around that negative infinity because it's always going to have parentheses. But with this -3, since it's a closed circle, since it's less than or equal to, we're going to make it a bracket. And so this is how we write that in interval notation. Finally, we have -4 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 12. And so we have our two endpoints given already. We don't have to worry about infinity or negative infinity with our compound inequalities. So our -4 has an open circle. We look at the inequality between those, it's just less than, so we're going to put parentheses around there. With our 12, it's less than or equal to, or a closed circle. So we're going to put a bracket there, and that's our answer. So note that with your intervals, we're either going to have a number or you're going to have infinity or negative infinity. We don't put the variables in interval notation, all right? It's only endpoints. All right, now let's move on to solving inequalities. So when we're solving linear inequalities, there's really not a lot of difference between this and equations. The biggest thing is we were replacing that equal sign with an inequality. So either less than or equal to, or greater than and equal to. One thing we do need to keep in mind though, is that if we divide by a negative or multiply by a negative, we do need to flip our sign. So let's do an example of why that is. So let's take -3 is less than 2. So right now, this is a true statement. We can add to it. Let's go ahead and add 4. That's going to give us +1 is less than 6, and that's still true. We can subtract from it. Let's go ahead and subtract 3. And that's going to give us -2 is less than 3, and that's still a true statement as well. If we multiply by a positive number, you can see that's also going to stay the same. Now let's see what happens when we multiply by a negative. Let's multiply it by -2. That's going to give us +4. If we keep this symbol the same way, -6, you can see that this doesn't hold true anymore. And so what we need to always remember to do is flip the inequality symbol whenever we divide or multiply by a negative, all right? So let's go ahead and do a couple of examples. We're going to start off with x minus 7 is greater than or equal to 5 plus 3x. And we're just going to solve this for x. So let's move our variables over to one side, move our constants over to the other side. So we'll start off by subtracting 3x on both sides. We can also add 7 on both sides. You can see that the 7's on the left-hand side will cancel out. Those 3x's on the right-hand side will cancel out. And that's going to leave us with -2x is greater than or equal to 12. And so now what we need to do is divide both sides by -2. When we do that, -2's are going to cancel out. It's going to give us x, but we have to remember to flip that symbol, and that's going to give us x is less than or equal to -6. Now, we need to be able to write this in interval notation. So remember that interval notation, you need 2 endpoints, and you're either going to use brackets or parentheses. We have one endpoint here, so since we're pointing to the left, the other one's going to be negative infinity. Remember that negative infinity always uses parentheses. I go over here to the -6. I'm going to put a bracket around that because it is less than or equal to. All right, so this is our answer in interval notation. But we also need to know how to put this on a graph. So we're going to graph this on the number line. We're going to put -6 right here. And since it's less than or equal to, we're going to put a closed circle. And we're just going to shade to the left all the way to negative infinity. And that is how you would graph this. Let's do another example. Let's say we have 2k plus 3/2 is less than 5k minus 7/3. All right, the first thing we want to do here is get rid of our fractions. So we need to multiply by a common denominator. In this case, that's going to be 6. So we're going to multiply everything by 6. That's going to give us 12K. 6 times 3 is 18 divided by 2 gives us 9 is less than 30K. 7 times 6 is 42 divided by 3 is 14. So it's going to be minus 14. We have 12K plus 9 is less than 30K minus 14. And now we're going to go through and solve this. So let's go ahead and subtract 9 on both sides. We'll go ahead and subtract 30K on both sides as well. We see that our 9's cancel out, our 30K's cancel out. And that's going to leave us with negative 18K is less than negative 23. Divide both sides by negative 18. And we get K is greater than 23 over 18. You're still going to do this the same way when it comes to interval notation and your graphing. So this is going to be a parentheses with 23 and 18, comma, infinity. And if we graph it, we're going to have 23/18 right here. That's going to be an open circle. And we're going to shade to the right this time. It's going towards positive infinity. And just keep on going.